All right, so let's jump right into it. Thank you, everybody, for attending episode 20, I believe, in Let's Talk Recruiting. Appreciate everybody's time in the short week. I'm sure everybody's who's out there working everybody has to work a step up a little notch here when we get into the short week, so much appreciated. Today's topic is 5 things I wish my ATS could do. So it's very rare do I find a recruiter that's happy with their ATS, but they do exist. And today we have 5 of our group members from across the country. We got representation, so a great group of people. We have Nikki Mitchell from Atlanta, Monica Workall from Denver, Lisa Eisenstadt. Did I get that right, Lisa?
Got it.
Got it. From Phoenix, and Robert Bursey from Nashville, and Wesley Mersinger. Did I get that one right, Wesley?
Mersinger, close, yeah.
Mersinger, all right, correct. I'm getting better at names. From New York City, and I have, of course, out in Orange County, the LA area. So what we're going to do is just do a round table, bring up some talking points. If we got time, we're going to try and address the wish list that we got from attendees when they registered, but I think we got a good set of discussion going on here. So with that said, Nikki, I'm going to sort of jump over to you first with your item.
So I'm Nikki Mitchell. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Cox Enterprises, and in my purview, I oversee executive search for Cox Communications for director level and above, and for Cox Enterprises, kind of everything soup to nuts. So we like to say mailroom to boardroom for Cox Enterprises. So those 2 divisions, I have a counterpart who oversees executive search for Cox Automotive, and we have counterparts below us, beside us that oversee below director level. And we currently use Taleo, so I know that everybody will be asking, what system are you on? So we use Taleo. And one of the things that we struggle with in executive search is always that balance of when do you have someone apply, especially in executive search, versus how do you handle a source candidate. And with executives, having an executive apply often, fights with that application and sourced candidate experience when you want to provide kind of that first class or white glove experience to an executive. And so that's one of the things that we'd really like to see is for compliance, so to speak, that federal compliance aspect that we have, to not fight so much with the sourced applicant kind of situation where us adding people in wouldn't be such an issue with that compliance of everyone has to apply. So that's what I wish my ATS could do, and that may have to do with some federal guidelines as well.
Nikki, how are you doing it right now with managing your source candidates?
Yeah, we actually make source candidates apply. It's not a great experience. It would be better if we could just add them to the system, track their progress, and it would be seamless for them. They would never know that they were part of a system, and everything would just be handled appropriately versus asking them to apply when they may not be ready, or they may not be, all in.
Hey, Nikki, I assume that you guys are publicly traded and potential federal contractors?
We are federal contractors, but we are a private family-held company.
I just came from one of those, so I can relate. Your biggest objection is going to be that your sourced, looks like I froze. There we go. Okay. Is that your source candidates need to understand the reason why you're asking them to apply. But because you're a federal contractor, you're never going to get beyond the compliance aspect of it. But what I will say is that having just come from a very large family-owned organization, it's cultural more than it is experiential. And your sourced executive candidates, depending on what their practice area is. So like I find engineers are far less understanding than, let's say, architects. I think that the problem comes into play that our ATSs aren't very consumer friendly. And so their experience is bad because we don't prepare them or walk them through it or give them a concierge service of doing it with them. And so they see it kind of like when you go in and you give blood. If you get a good guy, it doesn't hurt. And if you get a bad guy, it hurts like heck. But from a compliance standpoint, you're never going to get beyond the fact that they're going to have to apply. And technically, they shouldn't be talking to your organization for any position, you know, once it becomes more serious without that application being on file.
Oh, you're a stickler, Lisa.
Yeah.
I worked for a lot of companies that have worked directly for the federal government. And so I've also been through 8 audits and been called to the stand. And I'm going to tell you, once you've been burned, you don't ever want to be burned again.
It'd just be
Getcha.
nice if that compliance aspect could exist with the recruiter driving it just as much, right? If a candidate sends you their resume and you have that email trail, and you're going to parse in a resume anyway, and you could send them an electronic e-signature. Hey, can you just make sure that I've entered your information in correctly? You know, that would solve a lot of issues. And there's just not a great way to do that, because the password and username get you hung up in Taleo in particular.
And same with Success Factors and Brass Ring and, you know, Workday, because it's not, you can't act as the individual.
Well, let me sort of go ahead, Wesley.
Oh, no, I was just going to chime in. I tend to agree with Lisa. I think the candidates are, even though we may not see it this way, are far less frustrated with us as they are with our systems. And, you know, it's something as easy as uploading a resume and answering 5 questions should take you 5 minutes. But even with the higher end ATSs, their parsing is not all that great still. And so what should take 5 minutes is typically a minimum of a half an hour. And so I think that's where a lot of that frustration comes out.
Nikki, I'll throw a real world option at you, but although it's sort of a big to do option, it's not easy to do. And this was with Taleo. So I worked with, this was some years ago, a major biotech company was on Taleo. We put, for the sourcing team, we implemented a CRM, and all their sourcing activity was done in that CRM. And once somebody got to that point where, yes, I'd like to apply, or let's move forward with it, the sourcers themselves, there's a button, send it to Taleo, that literally said that. And they would, and I know it's typically regarded against doing it, they would kind of like apply for the candidate in that manner. So we'd already have that resume in that CRM, move it over, and go into the Taleo. And we did survive an audit with I can't remember, they got some award for it, but they did really well. And one of the key factors is that was we separated by definition the CRM and ATS. So once you got associated with that rec, ATS, that's discoverable. CRM was not discoverable. So that was like a major key play in it.
Yeah, we actually do have that option. We do have a CRM that we use. We are able to feed that into Taleo. I think to Lisa's point, right? It's about creating, and we haven't done it, right? We haven't created a process that the federal government is happy with, that Taleo is happy with, that the recruiters are happy with, and that the candidates, and to Wesley's point, right, that they're fine with doing something. The candidates are fine with doing something. I think it's our desire to create that first-class experience where we're delivering something to a candidate versus the candidate delivering something to us. And so that's the balance of the ATSs haven't taken the aspect of any hard-to-fill position, regardless of executive or not, but how you balance that sourced candidate, which you might treat a little bit more differently than your applicant, only because you're working to pull them in every day. And so sometimes when you ask someone to do something for you that you're continuing to try to pull in and attract, it can be a detractor. And so that's the tricky balance.
Agreed. And anybody else want to add to Nikki's item?
My pain point?
Yeah, your pain point?
I actually wanted to ask, have you clocked your application process, and as far as clocking how long it takes to get through your application? That's something that we did last year, and we found ways to kind of streamline the application but still get the required compliance content, but knowing that it only takes 3 minutes for a candidate to get through our application process, kind of gives me the peace of mind to know that I can kind of educate them up front. Hey, I just needed to take 3 minutes to complete the application steps, and then we can get you into the next step in the process.
Yep. We actually did a big evaluation of our total application process last year, late last year, beginning of this year, before COVID. Time is all kind of running together now. And we found that compared to other major Atlanta companies and to our competitors, our application process was actually smoother and faster. So we do have some confidence that it's not the length of the application or the actual application process, even though Taleo can get lengthy. That's not a barrier that we believe exists for Cox. For me, it's just having worked in executive search and having worked on the inside now, it's just a balance of how do you satisfy all three things, the candidate, the recruiter, and compliance and the government, as you're managing a source candidate and an ATS
Gotcha.
and a compliant process.
I myself have applied to an ATS after I've accepted an offer in the process. So it's kind of work the system sometimes, but do what you got to do.
Not to hear thyself.
Yeah, nobody official is listening to all that stuff, and I won't name names in that piece of it, but it's funny. I mean, I've seen recruiters who will get that person's resume because it came in an email and they'll apply for them, right? And everybody knows, hey, you're not legally supposed to do that. But sometimes it's like, I won't tell if you don't tell type situation. But yeah, it's frowned upon. I do like the tools where, hey, if I emailed you my resume, as the recruiter who receives it, you can just have an email address to forward in your ATS that automatically parses that into it when those systems are there. That again was into a CRM, not an ATS. But Nikki, to your point, hey, make it easy and streamlined as possible for everybody involved. So those little subtleties sometimes come into play. All right, let's jump into Monica and your item.
Yeah, so my name is Monica Varho, and I lead recruiting coordination and operations for a company called Rally Health. We're a digital health solutions company. I'm happy to see so many health-related recruiting members here on the call. So very exciting and pretty rare. So thanks for having me. And we've been through a lot of discovery in terms of trying to decide what the best ATS is for us. We are currently on Greenhouse. We've been with Greenhouse since 2014. We are a tech company, so it's a very common tool that tech companies like to use. The other one, kind of big one, being Lever. So I'm curious if anybody on the call, because it was funny as we were communicating ahead of this, if anybody does use Lever or has used Lever. We were particularly interested in them because they are also a CRM, so they're a combination of both. And ultimately, we ended up deciding to stay with Greenhouse for a variety of reasons that I'm happy to talk to folks more offline about, but and instead have invested a lot in integrations to help solve for some of these wants. And I spoke about that last week on the 5 things that I'd wish for in recruiting tools panel as well. But, for example, I mentioned customizable surveys. Greenhouse has a survey function, but we have instead chosen to invest in a tool called Starred, which allows us to customize them. We do, for example, ask candidates at all stages of the process, including those who've just applied and haven't spoken with anyone. How was it applying? What was the process like? Was it painful? Was it difficult? Or was it really easy? So we're able to measure all stages of the process, and it's automated as well. It integrates, like I said. Another one, job posting software called TapRecruit, uses augmented writing, to help us debias language as well, and it syncs with Greenhouse, and then spits it out on our careers page automatically, which is really, really lovely as well. And you're able to collaborate with hiring managers through the tool, things like that. So that's really great. And then I obviously oversee recruiting coordination. And I don't think that a lot of ATSs focus heavily on on scheduling functionality, and understandably, so they're just such robust systems. So we had invested in Good Time instead, and we've been using that for a long time just to help with high volume scheduling, putting together panels and things like that. But our most exciting tool that we've invested in recently is Beamery. So that's going to be our CRM. Again, would be so curious to hear if anybody has used it before, also in the chat. We are just on the verge of launching. So a lot of the things that Nikki, you were talking about, we're hoping to also glean from Beamery, helping also to keep passive candidates engaged, get them on campaigns, things like that, that our ATS maybe, it's a little more challenging to do that. Also parsing, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, things like that. So definitely excited about that. And then, I know I'm covering a lot here, but, like I said, we've solved for a lot of things through integrations, right? But of course, we would love to have one system that is, able to sort of cover it all. And on the email thread that we had, I was, it was so interesting to see, like, for example, reporting capabilities, being able to extract data and put it into a table really easily. We don't have that, unfortunately, in Greenhouse. And I think a lot of people do struggle with reporting and it taking a little longer than we'd like for it to. And also, sourcing, being able to easily, identify top candidates and keep them engaged, put them into other recs and things like that. So yeah, I'm so curious. I'll pause because I've said a lot here, but I'm just so curious, especially Robert, what is this magical ATS that you have that solves for all of these?
Well, I'll say, we honestly use ISOMs, and I've been with the company for a little over 3 years now, or going on 3 years now, but only moved into my role in the last year, and really just kind of peeling back, the capabilities of what the system can do. And as you dig through a lot of the things that were listed out as needs for a lot of the recruiters out there in the field, from Outlook integration, texting, the biggest miss, I guess, that a lot of the ATS is out there, kind of what you mentioned earlier, automation. Mm-hmm. Automating those steps in the process. I mean, we're always looking for a way to automate each step of the process that we possibly can. When I first took over my role, I mean, our recruiting cycle was horrible. It was 87 days from application to offer, and we're now down to 4 days on average. So, I mean, when you're talking about the healthcare industry and all of that, to get your entire cycle down to 4 days has just been phenomenal for us, reducing time to fill. But again, kind of being thoughtful about the process in itself and making sure that, you're thinking about not just the candidate, but you're thinking about the recruiter, you're thinking about the hiring manager, the executives that are looking at the reporting. And, ISOMS has really robust reporting, and the things that they don't have, we've been able to actually ask them to create formulated fields for us. Just recently, I don't really like the way that it reports on time to fill in the system, so we created our own metrics in there. But more importantly, we wanted to know, how many average applications per open day and average interviews per open day, so we can actually set the metric to say, if it takes 15 nurses to apply to a position in order to get a successful hire, how do we streamline and be strategic about what we're getting into? And then, of course, identifying those jobs that have no candidate flow and feeding that automatically to our media partners to say, hey, these are the most important jobs because they're aged beyond this point and they have no candidate flow. So this is where our marketing dollars need to go. But I can say, honestly, the reporting ability with ISOMS has been phenomenal, because I can create the right experience for my employer relations folks, my hiring managers, hiding the candidates that are in the recruiter application phase from the hiring managers, so they don't try to beat us to the candidates. That was always an issue. Well, I could call that candidate quicker than the recruiter can. I was like, yeah, but you're messing up the experience, because now they're getting 2 phone calls. They got it from the hiring manager, and now the recruiter's a day late or whatever. But somebody mentioned SLAs. We have very strict SLAs in reporting, and we actually report that on the recruiter's dashboard to show who's in each status. You know, the recruiter has 24 to 48 hours to make action items, and for our TA managers, they have the same reporting for their own team to be able to see their team's recruiters, basically to say, okay, these are out of SLA and you need to take action on these candidates, you know?
Robert and Monica, I'm really curious to know how large your organizations are, because there is a proportion to scaling. So I remember looking at ISOMs, and we couldn't go with ISOMs because they didn't have a big enough global footprint. At another company I worked at, I had 73 recruiters and the average rec load was 60 recs. So in another organization, you know, we had a global footprint, but people only had 25 recs. And so I'm curious, you know, I'm listening to you talk and I'm curious to know, how big are your organizations? Because that issue with managers calling candidates before recruiters, I don't care what size your organization has, that's behavioral, that happens everywhere. Trust me, in India, they call them, I think they psychically know who they apply before they even apply. But, you know, it's, what I found is that I kind of think of it like, since you're in the healthcare industry, kind of like doctors. If you go to a generalist, you know, like a Success Factors or a Connexa or, you know, something like that, big behemoth, they're trying to please everybody and you're kind of getting an average level of care, but you're touching all the bases. And if you want a specialist, like you were talking about Beamery and other places, I know like Yellow, I'm a big, huge fan of Yellow in the UR space. You know, those folks are awesome. I've never found anybody who's done coordinating and scheduling well, because they can't do it globally and they can't speak between all the systems, and there's so much security. So I'm just curious, are you guys both part of large multi-global organizations, or are you national organizations?
So we're national, and to give you an idea, I started a little over 2 years ago, so we were at about 750 total across the country, and now we are at over 1,500. So in terms of growing, you know, we have obviously tens of thousands of candidates in our ATS, you know, at this point. But, you know, I will say that a lot of it is also dependent on how you set things up out of the gate. And I think that that was where we are still playing catch up, because now we really do have someone who specializes in, you know, talent acquisition, reporting and metrics, that, you know, of course looks at it and was like, oh my gosh, you know, please, we got to clean up these stages, you know, and there's so much functionality in Greenhouse, but also in some ways, so many ways to customize the titles of things, you know, that we really, you know, we're in the process now of trying to kind of just clean everything up so that we can, you know, be set up for success in the future.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that will help you be successful in any type of reporting is really having a solid infrastructure of what those fields are that you want to pull. You can always have different things that you market, right? A marketing title versus a job code, right? So that you can pull those up. An infrastructure of hierarchy from a hiring manager, but also an infrastructure of hierarchy from a business, right? So having those things really, really help. And then when you can plug in your SLA and compare those metrics to that infrastructure, that's really where you get your strongest. But you have to set that up as an organization and make a commitment to that. And don't even forget the locations, right? That's a whole different, because recruiting in Milwaukee is completely different than recruiting in LA. It's completely different than Dallas and Atlanta. So it's really that infrastructure that really helps you get to that good reporting. We use Tableau as an overlay. I don't know if anybody else uses Tableau, but we have tremendous, probably too many dashboards to name. But I think the other thing that you need to think through, and Robert kind of alluded to it, is what you want to push to people, right? Versus what you want people to pull out of a system. So with you're measuring KPIs, that's something you need to push to make sure you're getting behavioral change. We're pushing this to you, we need you to act on it. Versus this is just an information that you may need to pull at some point, and here's where you can go and pull it. Those are things that I think every organization struggles with, because everybody wants to have a dashboard, but quite frankly, dashboards don't always drive behavior. I think Lisa's probably shaking her head like, that's the same experience she's having.
Well, this was my question that I sent to Sean actually is that one of the places, and I'm really curious, I don't want to end the discussion around Monica's, but when we get over
Hey, Lisa, let's sort of jump to your topic, right? Just in the sense of keeping the clock moving, but yeah, let's jump over into yours.
Well, my name is Lisa Eisenstadt. I'm new to the group. Most recently, I was the head of global talent acquisition and mobility for Bechtel Corporation based out of Reston, although I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. And my background has been as a transformational leader for corporations. They've usually been larger than 25,000 multinationals. And as I was explaining to Monica earlier, I'm learning how to enjoy my summer off. One of my struggles, and I've had the really great gift of working with some phenomenal people, is not so much, I think we finally got into a place in our generations of being able to at least have a really intellectual discussion about what metrics are important to us as specialists, as SMEs. Where I struggle is in the story and the communication to hiring managers. With all of our systems, small, big, whatever, they all come with their set of dashboards, and or we use something like Business Objects or Tableau and we make our metrics. Yet everybody seems to want something just slightly the shade of different, and everybody seems to want to manipulate the information. And then there's the whole conversation on, do we keep our recruiters' success rates confidential? Who do we publish them to, and how do we measure them? But my real question, just to get to what Nikki was talking about, is that has anybody ever been very successful at getting what I call commercial dashboards for the non-SME in their ATS? I haven't run across them yet, but I'm curious to know how people address the internal marketplace, if that makes sense.
I'm going to say, with login groups, honestly, I mean, with ISOMs, we use the different login groups to kind of customize the experience for that particular user, so employer relations, they may not need as much information about, what's going on in the TA purview, I guess. But at the same time, when you go back to the hiring manager, making customized reports specific to their location to say, this is your location's time to fill, and based upon how quickly you're engaging your candidates, this is what's important to you or should be important to you in that aspect. So as we train, we train them to consider that,
So imagine you've got 25,000 employees and you've got, you're hiring for 4,000 positions. My question to you, Robert, is that, are you enabling your users to create the dashboards from the information they're receiving? Or do you have a department that just works on it and pushes back out to them what you think they need to know?
So a little bit of both. So, I mean, I customize their dashboards based upon what we feel is most important that kind of follows our SLAs. So like making a dashboard to say, this is we have recruiter dependent actions. These are your hiring manager dependent actions. These are the things that are most important to you right now. But also, kind of giving them the analytics to say, this is what your site's performing at as far as your staffing rates and all of that. But as somebody else mentioned, we stream all of our data out of ISOMs into Tableau as well to kind of merge with finance, with the staffing matrix, the turnover, and all of that basically. So there's a separate analytics team that we partner with to make sure that they're streaming 100% of everything that goes on in ISOMs into Tableau to kind of merge with everybody else, with all the finance department, everything else.
We do some of that too, but we also feel pretty strongly that, finance doesn't let us into their system to run payroll. So we don't let them into our system to run our metrics, and similar for performance, right? We don't understand how their team is performing, and so it's our job to manage performance versus their job to pick a recruiter based.
Are you the one that's doing the surveys, or was that Monica?
We do surveys and use Tableau.
And so do you make your surveys public?
It's part of the KPI for the recruiter, and they're public in that if a boundary partner receives a comment on our survey, we do share that information back, and it's up to them how they want to handle that information.
Lisa, when you say public, do you mean outside the recruiting team or outside the company?
Outside the recruiting team. All of this is internal information.
Yeah,
The push-pull from the ATS technology environment conferences that I've been going to has been just what Robert and Nikki are talking about specifically, which is that who decides and what are ATSs doing to be user-friendly. So for those of you of a certain age, we remember actually getting manuals with all of our software. And you would take your large beer and your even larger manual, and you'd spend the weekend reading it. And nowadays, we know if you can't intuitively figure it out, screw it, you're going to buy a different system. And that speaks to kind of the greenhouse issue too, which is that a lot of the more modern ones like ISIMS and others have kind of come to the table with these ready to use. But the problem is that I'm finding is that they're still not addressing the common man. Our recruiters, somebody sent out, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who, sent out an email prior to our meeting about, it's really sad that some of our own recruiters don't even know how to use their own technology. And what I've discovered is all of this stuff is really important, but the one thing that we don't do is we don't train our people, and like teachers and doctors and airplane pilots, we don't re-educate them on a regular basis. So they don't know how to use SMS texting, and they don't know how to use all the tools of the ATS, and they don't know how to go into Tableau and pull out a report so they can track their own metrics. And so that's why I was curious to know, does anybody feel like any of the ATSs are doing a good job in a prepackaged consumer internal to the company, not just TA facing metrics? We had a whole department that did nothing but do reporting out of business objects, and they had 35 people in it, and we still couldn't get it right. So it's just, yeah.
I have a few that I unfortunately have not gotten to use myself, but I was fortunate enough to be part of a project team here at Chubb that evaluated Oracle Cloud and Workday. And in the time spent evaluating those tools, they were very user friendly, and you would set the rules yourself, of course, based on what you wanted people in the organization to be able to access. But I could see very easily translating that reporting to managers and senior level executives where they could just click into Oracle Cloud themselves, and anything they may want to see about their employee population, the funnels for their open positions, whatever it may be, and easily do so. I have also gotten a chance to get a little bit of experience with a tool called Visier. We don't currently use it from a talent acquisition module perspective, but we do use it for human resources overall reporting. And so I've gotten to play in it a little bit from that seat. And although I wish we had it for talent acquisition, I could see that being very user-friendly as well. But I can definitely speak highly from what I saw of Oracle Cloud and Workday.
Thank you.
I gotta run.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. I'll add that when you're dealing with an ATS, that support person that you get, you typically get one. When you get that really good one, and Robert, I used to be on iSIMS 2 companies ago. What was his name? I want to say Trevor, but I'm not sure that was it. Fantastic. Last place, I won't name names, but our support person was horrible, where we kind of felt like we were on our own. And then within a year, we had 3 of them. Like, well, we know what they probably know. So finding that liaison between that company back to the company is crucial. And sort of sticking with iSIMS, I know they care about their customer usage just because of that experience I had. And I'm a CRM guy, operations guy, so I really got into iSIMS. And they would have me talk to their other customers who are having trouble with certain aspects of it. So they're like, hey, whatever we got to do to make our customers use the tool and happy with the tool. I really liked iSIMS in that regard, but I always count my blessings. This kind of goes for every tool. When you get that good support, wow, is that so good for the product? Because we'll resign when your contract comes around.
Right.
It's such a good way to keep a customer.
When it's a struggle because they're more engineers and they're not TA mindset. So they don't think like a recruiter because they haven't been in our shoes in that aspect. So we're trying to paint a picture for them from the recruiter's perspective and say, hey, I needed to do this. So what can we do together, to make it do this and automate, and that's been our number one back and forth. And that's why we have standing calls literally every week with our tech team to make sure that we're on the same page. Here's my projects. How can you help me get to point Z basically in this project?
Hey, Robert, let's continue on with your item. Let's throw the next topic
Yeah,
to you.
so the one thing that I had brought up was internal status changes without a recruiter, like moving an employee from full-time to per diem or vice versa. So, it's frustrating, I think, to a lot of the field recruiters out there, the number of times that, well, this person just needs to be reduced down to per diem status, or we have to open a requisition to do that, versus having a hiring manager self-service type component where it could be all in one. So the ATS would be used, to source external candidates, but also, at the same time, be able to promote or transfer candidates to different statuses and all of that. So that's been our probably our number one struggle, to not take the focus away from the recruiter about sourcing, because obviously it's about sourcing and getting that external talent into the system without just taking care of our current folks basically in that aspect.
How are you handling
Robert,
your
have you guys,
Oh, go ahead, Wesley. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Sean. I was going to say, Robert, have you guys looked to just simply shift some of that work to your HR business partners? So we use Taleo as our ATS, but PeopleSoft is our broader HR management system. And so, of course, depending on the situation, but if it's a simpler act of kind of what you're talking about, of somebody moving from full-time to part-time or changing function, but within a same job family, whatever it may be, we try to keep some of that as much as makes sense out of the recruiting team's hands and out of Taleo, where it's just an action triggered by the HR business partner in PeopleSoft. So I don't know if that might help with some of the extra work that's coming to your team that might not make sense to be coming to your team. I know obviously that'll affect some of your tracking and reporting, but you may want to, I guess, question if it's necessary to capture some of that stuff in your reporting, since it's not necessarily impacting your team anyway.
Right. We just know that it takes the productivity time, I think, away from the recruiters when they're trying to manage an internal move versus, focusing on those vacant positions out there that really need to get filled, in that aspect. We utilize Kronos, so I'm not sure about all the capabilities of what Kronos has available to them, but if the ATS could have a separate portal, I guess, or process flow to allow the hiring manager to just, have a different workflow to say, I want to take a current employee and move them. The biggest struggle, I think, for us is that our job descriptions are all in the ATS, and that's why they always go back to the ATS. Well, all the job descriptions are in there, so that's the only link that we have to move people, I guess, in that aspect.
But that's also part of your problem is that a job description or a job catalog isn't the same as a job ad.
Right.
Or a job poll. And you know this, I see all shaking your heads. Our problem is that, I love all my colleagues who've come up through the ranks as generalists, but recruitment isn't an HR corporate function. It's sales.
Right.
And as such, you're not going to take the specs of an Audi TT and use that to advertise the car. You're going to generalize it, you're going to oversimplify it, and you're going to appeal to the broadest masses. So where I've had the biggest complications was at one of the companies, and Robert, I so feel your pain. The problem is that the corporate structure speaks the general language of job definition to not trap themselves into an environment where they are committed to specific work. And
Right.
so, and they don't want to create a separate function. And they think the same way when it comes to managing their people. You shouldn't be managing the movement of people based on the things that you're using to describe in a job ad.
Right.
And while the systems can do that, you can have, PeopleSoft, Oracle, whatever, whoever you want to talk to that can come up with these magical, to Monica's points, integrations. You're only as strong as your best tech person, and you're only as good as your chief strategist. And if they don't see what you do separate from what the rest of the corporation does for HR, you're going to forever have someplace it's going to bulk, you know what I mean? Someplace it's going to balk. And that's, you highlight extremely well where that can happen.
Right. And I guess I should have mentioned that. I should have introduced myself first. I mean, we're part of a smaller healthcare company based out of Nashville, but we have roughly 550 locations across 32 states, and we've got about 16,000, just over 16,000 employees. And the majority of what we do essentially is a contract based. So we contract with jails and prisons. So we hire healthcare to privatize the healthcare portion of those facilities. So each client is definitely different in that aspect. So of course our job templates are very robust based upon each client's requirements, but every one of them essentially have the same kind of needs in that aspect in regards to moving candidates or moving current employees in that aspect. But
Robert, do you kind of work in like an evergreen talent pipeline type format versus, hundreds of individual recs that are kind of unique in their own little way?
so we've talked about evergreens, but we pride ourselves on knowing the true time to fill, and we haven't. While iCIMS has the capability to go evergreen, we just don't trust that it's going to give us the right analytics that we need in this
And you're going to have a
particular.
audit issue with it.
Right.
What was
You're
that,
going to have
Lisa?
audit issues with evergreens.
Yeah, I hate evergreens. As far as like knowing what's going on, it screws everything up. I get the need to do it, but oh wow, does it make knowing what's going on difficult? Especially when you're pulling candidates from evergreens from a year ago. It's like, well, how did that work? But interesting.
Right.
Excellent. Wesley, let's. Or did anybody have anything to add to Robert there, real quick? Sorry. All right, Wesley, let's jump over to your item.
Yes. So hi, everyone. Wesley Mersinger. I am currently at Chubb. In my second role here, I originally had led a team that recruited for a couple functions within the company, particularly our middle market commercial, our personal lines, our communications team, as well as our risk engineering team. And more recently, for the past year now, a little over a year, I've been overseeing the strategy for recruiting for our early career program. So our fresh out of college, entry level, what we call the Chubb Associate Program, as well as for our summer interns. We are currently on Taleo. Past company, I was on PeopleSoft, so I have not been fortunate in terms of being on some of the really cool ATSs that are out there. Have only been teased a little bit through the demos that I've gotten to sit through, and unfortunately haven't seen us get the approval to move forward with, but hopefully someday. One of my challenges, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is I'm shocked at the role that the resume still plays in the ATS world. I think personally that there's being too much emphasis being put on parsing the resume, but still needing it to be in the application rather than just leveraging the data within the resume, right? If it's being uploaded as an attachment, it's part of your ATS. Without being a tech guru myself, still am shocked that we can't more simply be attaining the information right out of the attachment, whether it's that information goes to the onboarding team, whether it's during your search, the fact that it can't just search to keep the wording in the resume. So I think that's been one of a handful of challenges that I'm still a bit surprised by, given all the artificial intelligence and machine learning advances we've had to still see that challenge exist.
Wesley, do you use tagging at all around your applicants or candidates, like keyword tagging that you're assigning to people after your engagement with them?
No, we don't. And I don't know if that is or isn't a function within Taleo, or if it's something that's there and we just don't use. But I've noticed even from a search perspective, it's very challenging to do anything more than search on a candidate's name. To try to do any keyword searches in Taleo, I've just not found it to work very well. It's just been very basic and typically isn't yielding back the results that we want. So I'm not too familiar with tagging. I know some of our team members leverage that in LinkedIn just because we have a variety of either recruiter seats or recruiter light seats. So we see it more there than we do within Taleo itself.
What about pipelining? Do you do pipeline anyway, where you're taking people and putting them into kind of basically a bucket of some sort?
We don't. I would say, Chubb's point of view within our talent acquisition team is we are not as big on the pipelining topic, just because for us, the talent that we go after is predominantly claims and underwriting. And different people are going to have different points of view on this topic, but I think it does tend to differ a little bit than, say, nurse recruitment, for example, where you have a position open in St. Louis, Missouri. That position might be open once every year, every 2 years, or it might pop up every 3 or 6 months. And the talent market is just going to be so different each time you go to the table with that role. It's going to be so unique that we tend to not put too much effort into pipelining as opposed to just actively being really aggressive on the roles that are in play at the time. But that's where I allude to that I wish our search functionality was better, because we do recognize that there are great people already in our database. And although we don't necessarily pipeline, it's a shame that we can't easily just click a button and search and find the people that we already kind of quote unquote own within our own ATS.
You're here. Yeah, I second that. +1.
Same thing with identifying candidates that you've already identified that you end up paying an agency to represent to you.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a fun one.
or you find them again and you have to find them on LinkedIn and just to realize that they're already in your ATS.
Exactly.
I literally am going to be going through right now. I found we have, I think, over 20,000 candidates profiles I need to merge. We have an auto merge feature, but it was turned on again later, not out of the gate. So I've got my team. We're going to be, getting those profiles cleaned up. Got to keep it clean.
That's what a downturn helps us all out with. We all get to go back in, do all that cleanup we didn't have time to do the first time.
Yep.
So Wesley, do you have control of the parsing as far as the parsing functionality in your ATS?
Elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by the control over it.
So in my setup system for ISOMs, I have the ability to tell it, to parse after so many keywords. Basically, it's looking for the number of words, and I actually adjusted that about 1.5 years ago to better extract the keywords out of a resume parsing. And then, of course, the skills that are parsed out into the skills factor, there's a whole breakdown of skills that come in. I'm actually able to search all of those on our ATS. So if I'm looking at a job title, for example, like licensed practical nurse, I can extract all of the current employees that we hired and get all the keywords out. And then, of course, again, back to the reporting, I've got to extract it and then put it into a pivot table to kind of come up with, here's the top 10 keywords for all of the licensed practical nurses that we've hired that are currently with the company, that are lasted more than, say 6 months, when we're talking about turnover rates and all of that. It's kind of like plucking out in the concept of Amazon, where Amazon's kind of feeding you like items and all of that. So that way you could actually search those keywords and resumes from either the CRM, ISOMS Connect, or, whatever system that you're looking through, I guess, to hold your candidates. And of course, talking about pipelining, our configuration for ISOMS Connect, we actually set up a pipeline for every facility. So if a candidate got to a certain stage in the hiring process, the recruiter is able to quickly take all of the silver medalists and drop them into that site's pipeline. So that way, I've actually configured our system that when a new requisition opens, anybody that's in that pipeline is automatically notified that a new position is open. So that way, the recruiter's already got the first step out the door with an automated notification that's going out to anyone in that pipeline to let them know that a new vacancy exists. But then being able to go back and search out and look for those keywords. It is more of a manual process, but setting up the search template for the recruiters to quickly get to and say, okay, I'm looking for this zip code, I'm looking for these keywords. Boom, here's my search, here's my results, basically.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of if that exists with Taleo. What I will say in terms of what I am familiar with Taleo-wise is I don't know how much customization and changing at this point will happen. Just my broader understanding is that they really shifted away from, other than doing some maintenance related items, they've turned their attention kind of wholesomely to Oracle Cloud at this point, rightfully so. That's their product of the now and of the future. And I think actually the next update that we're getting later this summer for Taleo, I'm being told, is the last one that Taleo is even doing because of the greater shift and attention to Oracle Cloud. So at some point we're going to have to leave Taleo, but we'll see when that actually happens. But yeah, that's been my understanding, that it's kind of near end of shelf life for Taleo, and at some point it's going to be what we have is what you have, without additional updates and changes happening.
You think that's a good thing or bad thing, Wesley?
Yeah. Well, the setup time to set up.
It's a good thing if it convinces us to move on.
Right.
Excellent.
But starting over, right?
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, in the demos that I've seen, starting over still puts you in a way better place if you're upgrading to some of these new systems that are out there. Because not that they don't have continued room for improvement, but it's just day and night compared to some of the older tools.
Right.
Hey, Robert, quick question on your pipelining methods. How deep are you defining criteria to a pipeline? Is it just by title, or are you going deeper with multiple, hey, I need multiple keywords, or how are you defining your pipelines?
So, the biggest thing that I learned with our setup, that was the first thing that I set up when I joined the team. We had ISOMs for 3 years before I joined the team, and nobody had set up our ISOMs Connect, and I asked the ISOMs for some assistance, and they're like, well, we can't really assist you, but we can point you to the direction of other companies that are using it. And I looked at everybody else's setup, and I'm like, wow, this is really not really thought out, So essentially, I have 10 active talent pools, and I have the 500 inactive talent pools. The 10 are forward facing, so we gain maybe 50 to 100 candidates a day, every day that actively say, hey, I want to join your talent network. But getting into the searching and all of that and pipelining the candidates. So we've set it up to where the recruiters, again, you might have 3 quality candidates for that one position, to take those other 2 and instinctively drop them into that site's talent pool, the inactive talent pool that is. And of course, the key that I use in our setup is specialty. So when a candidate joins the active talent pool, or if they apply to our positions, one of the application questions is a specialty. So that way I've got a zip code and I've got a specialty to initially start with. So I can radius search them. And then of course we can start getting into those that have resumes that haven't opted out of a resume search. That way we can quickly get to those keywords that we're looking for based upon skill search.
I've typically done it when supporting multiple locations. You can't get too crazy with your pipelines, otherwise you'll never get people in them. I'd segment it by location, career level, right, or the individual contributor or a manager or director. So location, career level, then 2 levels of job role. So for example, in HR, it would be HR recruiter, HR business partner, HR legal, just to give some of that categorization or bucket. So when you reach out, you're sending them the right information. See a lot of those ATSs where it says join our talent network, and it says HR or legal or IT. What does that mean? I don't need to get a job alert from an HR partner. Unsubscribe, right? So it's always go a couple levels deep in your pipelines. I think just behooves every recruiter if they're going to be sending that outreach. So I'm always curious how people define their pipelines, because
well, see, and that's the whole thing, is the pipeline. The active talent pools really mean nothing, whereas we're searching off the specialty. So that way we're not only capturing those that are in the Connect system, but we're capturing the past candidates as we're sourcing either bulk text out of the system or bulk email out of the system, basically.
Excellent. All right, fantastic. Anybody want to add anything to Wesley's item? I know we didn't get, we touched on a lot of different items versus just the 5, I think, but it was all very good conversation. Okay, we're way past half hour, but great conversations. We kept it going. Appreciate it. Does anybody have anything that they want to kind of last add before we wrap it up?
I just wanted to, I was going through a lot of the wants that had been submitted, and I found it so interesting that so many recruiters are looking for texting capabilities with candidates. So I'm curious if anybody is using some sort of a platform for texting. Obviously, Robert, you're nodding your head for the 4-day, fulfillment. You must be doing something quickly with communication. But I'm just so curious, how successful those are, and is it personal? Does it feel personal? Do candidates respond well to it?
So we're actually using Text Recruit, and we actually started the AI project early last year before ISOMs acquired them, and it took us a while to get to the end result because, again, we're talking about engineers that design a platform that's not really TA minded and all of that, but we finally got the configuration down. And especially for nursing positions, nursing is 60% of our vacancies that we have for the company, but we've actually got an artificial intelligence sequence that we use our CRM basically to quickly get out to candidates and alleviate the recruiter from sitting there for the next 4 hours and they run a text campaign to reply to all the text messages. All they have to do is reply well path basically, and it runs them through the sequence that we collect the data. And of course, it allows it to drop the candidate directly on the requisition as a new applicant. And of course, because we don't have the application, we've created a process basically where the recruiter immediately moves them into an incomplete to open the application for the candidate, which generates the automated messaging to say, hey, you completed the first 2 steps. Click these links. You've got your reset, password reset, and here's your login credentials that were automatically created for you. And then essentially we're moving to the next steps of the process pretty quickly. We're trying to get into something like, I think you'd mentioned earlier, Beamery, to automate the first 3 steps because we use Calendly as our scheduling platform for the recruiter. So I've actually integrated that into our automated messaging. So as soon as the recruiter puts them into phone screen to be scheduled, instead of them having to send an email to send their Calendly link, the text and the email go out automatically to invite them to go schedule.
Fantastic. Yeah, love it.
Hey, Sean, one thing we haven't had a chance to talk about, and maybe for a future one, is how AI can be helping things like Olivia and other things that are on screen, concierge. We haven't talked about it here, but I talked a lot about, being in Phoenix where it's their home base, obviously I see a lot of stuff come out from them. But it's interesting to see that some of those things are turning inside. So Monica, to your point, they're coming up with concierge service for recruiters to help them work through their questions as they have them like an education tool like LinkedIn Learning. But anyways, that's a topic for another day, but that's something else to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not buying into AI so much, but in 3 years, I think I'll totally change my mind. So where it's going, yeah.
AI is like golf. Sometimes,
basically.
Yeah. Sometimes there are things that you can do extremely well. Unfortunately, there's only one thing you do extremely well, and people try to spread it through a lot of things. So just so you know, I only drive the golf cart well. I think that let's put it this way, Sean. I really want to be a believer.
Yep.
Right now, what I know is it does, and I wish, was it Nikki, the gal who was on before? I wish we had mentioned that to her, because part of the problem with our executive recruits is that concierge level service and things like Olivia and other types of programs like that, when specifically enabled for that level of applicant, works really well.
Yeah, there's some great examples out there. What I'm wishing for is that, hey, I think it's to everybody's point. You get all these applicants in your system. Everybody creates their own resume, right? Their own way, their own style, their own words. Maybe it's for that job. Maybe it's just a general one, to help that recruiter at least kind of get the ones above the bar to get through that filter. Because in my reporting, I look at unreviewed rates of applicants, and it's just a matter of, recruiters aren't lazy. They just don't have the time to get through all those. And how do you miss those needles in that haystack if you don't have the time to get through all the haystack? So that's
Wesley's point. The fact that we're in 2020 and we're still relying on, really a process that was invented when they invented the pen and the paper, or the pencil and the paper. It seems that there should be some more intuitive way to assist recruiters in augmenting the process without devaluing the things that are important for us to see. But it's still a human action. We still have to use our brain.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Wesley had to jump. I think it's time for all of us to jump, and much appreciate the time. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. So thanks for everything. Enjoy your day and enjoy the rest of the short week. Thanks, everybody.
A lot of fun. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you.